Hey, this is Tom with Fresh Vintage.
This is Jay with Fresh Vintage.
We have our special guest today, my good buddy Tom with Switch to Linux.
Well, thanks for having me here. Of course, over at Switch to Linux, we don't just talk about Linux. We talk about business and privacy news related to technology and things. And we thought it'd be a pretty good thing to do a little crossover with these guys here, talking cars and technology.
Cars and technology. If you have not checked out Switch to Linux, it's a great channel. Uh, you have a phone, you have Windows device, you have all these things in your life, but you also have a lot of connectivity that you don't even know about. So if you've never really thought about that, Switch to Linux is a great place to go. And that Dell computer will run forever because it's not run on Windows, folks. It's running on Linux. Was it Linux Mint?
This is Linux Mint.
Linux Mint. So it'll run to the end of time on that operating system. So
Unless, of course, I kill the boot drive with not clearing old kernels first.
yeah, check out his recent video where he fixes he described it as like a massive implosion. It's actually pretty cool and also a nightmare. So, but
Absolutely.
so today we're talking about cars. Obviously we're a car channel, but this is a little different take on cars, and we're thinking about like data connectivity, and we're thinking about cars that are always connected. I mean, I have a 2000 Cherokee outside. Jay has a 65 Mustang GT, and those cars are about as disconnected as you can get. You just hop in them and you drive them, right? You know, so. But today's cars, even 2016, 2017, and into like Teslas and whatnot, they're so connected. And I think that's a question we're gonna dig into a little bit today and ask the question like, why does this stuff need to be connected? Feel free to jump in. I'm just rambling, but do we need this kind of? What do you guys think? Do we need this kind of connectivity?
In a way, I think we do, only because technology has been growing by leaps and bounds. But also, you got to think at what point do we cross the line? You know, is it as he touched on earlier? It's not a necessity for vehicles to have this because I've got an almost 60-year-old car that still runs. I don't need technology in it.
And that's a. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I take kind of a dissenting view. I think that we need to keep our cars as disconnected from technology as conceivably possible, for several reasons that we'll probably get into here today. But I just, I've lived through the Windows 95 blue screen of death, and I don't need that happening at 60 miles an hour. B, I do not need a car that is perpetually connected for a hacker to get into and destroy my car at 65 miles an hour.
And that's a great call out because a few articles that we had brought in for the video here, as recently as 2014, and that's going back a little ways, but most every single car on the road, including the 2016 Forester here, and I would say 99.99% of the cars, they have what's called a black box. And if you've never heard of a black box, you may have heard of that from an airplane. The airplane crashes and they get the black box, so they want to see what happened in the plane. Virtually the exact same thing is happening in your car. It's checking your gas pedal usage 0 to 100%. It's checking your brake pedal 0 to 100%. If you have cameras in your car, it might be looking to see what happened 5-10 seconds before like the airbags deployed. Basically, they grab all this data just to confirm like what happened in the car. And the other side of that, put my tinfoil hat on here, is suddenly your insurance company has this information. They're like, well, you were texting and driving, or you were at 100% gas pedal usage before you hit the telephone pole or the other car. So this kind of data, this is a very, very small slice, but that kind of data suddenly is in the hands of anyone writing a question mark in the air here. It goes to anyone. Granted, I don't condone reckless driving. We don't want you racing your car or anything, but suddenly your car can tell on you. That sounds silly, but we've seen that happen. There's numerous articles where people were driving and they wrecked their car, and suddenly your always on car, your always connected vehicle tells on you, so to speak.
I mean, I just look at the current proliferation of AI right now. We just covered on the Weekly News Roundup. It wasn't related to cars, but it was related to AI being used in decisions as to who to give medical care to among the elderly in the government's new Medicare program, or is it Medicaid? I don't know, whatever one the older population gets, forced upon actually. But there's a new one of those that is using AI to determine who gets treatment or not, and that's a little frightening. With the AI being implemented to the car data, they can do a lot more decisions that you're not even privy to how they're being done.
And to touch a little bit off of what Tom was mentioning, I remember a few years ago at Nationwide, my old vehicle insurance, they offered, well, let's stick a little transponder in your OBD2 port to get you a better price um, on your insurance. And well, of course, I didn't do that, but you question, what are they seeing?
Well, I can answer that because I covered that in detail on my channel. They measure your G-forces, they measure your speed, they measure the time you go. So they literally know exactly where you're going, exactly when you're going, and exactly how your driving is. What you may not know by their advertising, but if you read their fine print, if you go on to their fine print and basically they create a tier. If you are within the top 10% of what they consider good drivers, that's where you get the discount. Most people don't actually get a discount, but the people on the lower tier of their statistics actually pay more for insurance. And if you disconnect that device from your insurance policy, you will automatically get higher rates than the medium tier without those things. That's all in the terms of service if you actually read them.
Yeah.
And so if you're not 100% like fully grasping what Tom's talking about, if you're the guy who stabs the brake pedal, if you're the guy who guns the gas at the green light, if you're the guy who whips around the other guy in the lane while maybe telling him he's number one or yelling at them out the window, I'm not pointing fingers here. All that being said, all of that G-force, all of that G-force, all of that action and movement in the car, that's what that thing does. That's what that OBD2 port data collector potentially does. And OBD2 has been in cars since 1996, so pretty much any car since 1996 could have that activity tracked and monitored. Yep. So stop and think about what we just said. Like, if you just gleefully, I'm trying to get a discount, not only are you possibly not getting a discount, but you're possibly taking all of this data and just gleefully giving it to anybody. Because it's not just the insurance companies. I'll draw a parallel here. T-Mobile, not just to pick on one cell provider because they all do it, but they've had so many breaches. I've had $1 for every breach kind of thing for data breaches. There were bounty hunters going out and finding people. They were using geolocation off your phone, and with that, they were actually finding people. Here's $150 a writer at a newspaper. Go find me, and the guy found them within an hour.
That was not a data breach, though.
That was not. That's not even a data breach.
That was just a feature of the apps and the way that the cell phone carriers worked. Now that hole has since been patched. But T-Mobile, Verizon, and AT&T, pretty much every cell phone was covered by that problem. However, what T-Mobile is bad at is they tend to get hacked a lot, and they tend to breach data a lot, including a recent one just in the last month.
And the challenge there is, like, you're generating all of this data. Does your car need 4G connectivity? You know what I mean? Do you guys need to have that constant connectivity in there? Don't get me wrong. It's nice to have Google Maps in your infotainment center, but you already have this in your pocket. So why do you need another layer of connectivity while you're driving down the street? What do you guys think?
Well, I think first where I teach people on my channel, don't even use this as your navigation device. Get yourself a car GPS. They provide a lot less data back, and it's one fewer thing, and it's specifically designed for easier navigation rather than your phone that you often will have to relog into. The car GPS is not impacted by the loss of data signals, whereas a cell phone is seriously impacted by those.
Yeah, and the harken off of that, I do, he's going to hit me, but I do. my car is Bluetooth into my head units, and I don't use
Should we stop recording, Tom?
yeah.
No, he's just about to get my Will Smith impression.
Yeah. So, but like, for example, my Forester has a button for Sirius Radio, and I got my car serviced at Subaru, and they sent me a letter that said, "Hey, you can get 90 days free Sirius Radio." I was like, "Oh, that's cool." And then I was like, "Well, I don't think I'll ever use it because I use everything off my phone." So to harken off of his, why does our vehicle need all this technology when we have our phone and he's going to hit me? So
So let's talk about. There's a story that Wired did. And granted, this is from like 2015, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm a Jeep guy. I've got a 2000 Cherokee out here, but this story specifically talks about a 2015 Cherokee being hacked, and it's since been patched. So if you have a 2015 Cherokee, don't panic or anything. But this thing, the guy was driving down the highway. They did this intentionally. It wasn't accidentally. Like they said, "Can you hack into this thing while I'm driving it?" So this guy's driving down the road, and it gets to slower and slower and slower because they were limiting the engine. Then the air conditioning goes on, I think full blast, if I remember correctly. Then the actual what was it? Then the radio started going full blare, and the windshield wipers were going just nonstop. So this car suddenly was almost crawling on the highway to the point where the guy called him in a panic and said, "Guys, you have to get this thing to turn back on." He couldn't actually just go in. I'm pretty sure this thing didn't have a normal key. He had to push the off button and push the power button to get it to turn back on. And he's sitting on the highway, like he's on Interstate 81. He's on Interstate I-95, and this car is like doing 20 miles an hour. I guess the question here is, with all that data, you have all this connectivity built in, and this loophole. If I remember correctly, the loophole was in the infotainment center that didn't have like a firmware update or something like that, which they had since patched. But that's a 2015 car, and we're here 8 years into the future, so to speak. Imagine a newer Tesla, or imagine any car with multiple speed sensors, and like now Ring has cameras inside the car, like all of this data being generated and the ability to potentially get into the backside of this. What do you think, guys?
My question is, how was it patched? Was it patched over the air, or did you have to take that in to get it patched?
That's a good question. And I mean, 4G was obviously a thing, but I think this was having 4G in a 2015 Cherokee. I don't know if that was a standard feature. So yeah, there's another issue right there. Suddenly, if you can't do this over the air, OTA over the air update, more and more cars are connected so that you can actually do that while you're driving or while the car's sitting in your driveway. But if you can't do that, suddenly is your car safe to drive? And then from there, then you have to schedule who knows how much it's going to cost you at the service center. If you're lucky, they cover it under warranty, and otherwise you could be spending hundreds at the dealership to get that resolved. What do you think, Jay?
that reminds me of a recent story with Ford. I think they're wanting to be able, like if you haven't paid on your car in a few months, that gonna it's gonna repo itself and drive it to the local dealership or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, Tom just had a video on
Yeah,
that.
I just did that in the I think it was the Sillyville section of my news, and I'll tell you, that was a fun one because it could send itself back to the car dealer, or it might just drive itself to the landfill. Like, wait, the car is going to drive itself to landfill. Excuse me, I'm not worth enough to manage myself. I'm just going to drive myself right into that.
It
Wait,
knows.
my kid's homework's in there.
It hit X day, and it's like this car is depreciated enough to where you're getting your coffee in the morning, look out the window, and the car's backing out of the driveway, and then the landfill calls you an hour later. Hey, your car is here. We traced your plates back to your house.
It's not even worth towing it.
Yeah, it's not worth towing it. Yeah.
Where's Greta Thunberg? Like, if a car is capable of driving itself to the dump, clearly it's not worth throwing away yet.
So, guys, this article here, this is another article from Wired. Granted, this is 2011, but it's still really relevant because the headline, the title is OnStar tracks you even when your car cancels service or when you cancel the car service. Imagine if your car was always connected and if your airbag's deployed, if you didn't stop it in time, it would automatically call for authorities. I mean, that makes sense unless you're maybe driving recklessly or you're drunk driving. Not that we condone either one of those, just for the record. But imagine, I've read stories where a car called the authorities and the guy was drunk as a skunk and he got himself a free DUI courtesy of his OnStar. It called automatically before he had a chance to maybe run away or something. I don't know. But, and again, we're not condoning that, but it's crazy to think that you would have a system that's not only in this case, even when you cancel it, it potentially is still tracking your car's whereabouts 24/7. What do you guys think?
Well, yeah, you start talking about the car calling 911 on itself. I just kept on thinking about the iPhones constantly calling 911 when the users are on roller coasters. And in one actual fun case, a John Piper sermon, when he gets all wired up and talking this, his phone actually called the police when he was preaching from the pulpit. Because of the G sensors. But as far as cars, yeah, I mean that's problematic. And I think we're going to get to the Volkswagen one about that next, right?
So to touch on what Tom was just talking about, Volkswagen in the great city of Chicago, a Volkswagen Atlas, if I remember correctly, got carjacked, and there was a 2-year-old in the back seat, if I remember correctly. And so the Chicago Police Department called Volkswagen's, I believe it's called a Carnet, if I remember correctly. Yeah, the Carnet trial period had ended on this Volkswagen, and the police pleaded with the people on the other end of the phone to temporarily reinstate the service so that they could GPS locate this car. So you have a car that has a service, and now it was getting blocked because they were like reading the lines, but they weren't reading the like between the script, so to speak. And the detective actually had to get a credit card and pay $150 just for them to turn this on. And at that point, they had already found the car and saved the child. So I kind of feel it was a big embarrassment for VW as a side, but they ended up giving free service to a whole bunch of people because of it. But this connectivity. Now we have a paywall, for connectivity. So we have all this technology built into your car that in theory you can't even use because now we got a paywall. It reminds me of like we were talking, we don't pay for the Ford, so to speak, and your car drives away or drives back to the dealer. Or I think it's BMW, they start charging $20 a month for heated seats or something like that. And if you don't spend the money, you don't get that service in your car. So my 2000 Cherokee, not that it has heated seats, but suddenly that thing will run forever. But my 2020, whatever it is, suddenly if I don't pay for the heated steering wheel or the cruise control, it doesn't work. I mean, why would we want that technology in our car if it's only going to end up being behind a paywall? I don't know. What do you guys think?
The most frightening thing I see about that article is that the car is constantly collecting data. Volkswagen knows exactly where that car is at all times, but you don't. You have to pay for information about your car that you've just paid. I don't know how much this car is, but I assume $50,000-$60,000 for. You have to pay extra money to know where your car is, but the company has all that information automatically, even though I've paid for it. Well, where is the option to say, I want to own this. I do not want your tentacles in it at all at this point in time? Because it's like, well, let's say, well, what if you need an update? Well, just pull the SIM card. If it's not on the internet, it doesn't need an update. Does it work? Okay, then. That's my thought.
Well, yeah, it's another thing with all these bells and whistles. It's, do we actually need all this stuff? We're becoming
dependent on it.
Dependent on this technology. I mean, my cousin bought a 50s truck and we joked around. It's like, hey, did you get your Bluetooth fixed? Stuff like that. But hey, it goes down the road. It doesn't technically need all these bells and whistles, but
I like the joke. My car, well, technically my car does have airbags. It doesn't have ABS. But Jay's Mustang, 65 Mustang GT, it's got no airbags, it's got no ABS, and it's got no problems, because we just get in it and we pump the gas pedal a few times and we fire it up and then we drive it. And there's no making sure the 5 computers are essential to run the engine. Like even my Cherokee has multiple computers in it. I think it even has a computer for the transmission. So now there's multiple computers running one vehicle. And modern cars, like last year, a lot of OEMs were shipping because they couldn't get the chips. They were shipping vehicles with partially finished computers in them, and then they would go take it to the dealer a month or two later so that they could put the motorized seat computer module in the vehicle so that the motorized seats could work. It really makes you stop and ask, like, do we need this in our vehicles? We're just trying to get to work. We're just trying to get to the grocery store. Tom's traveled the country twice now in a van that is, it's not old, it's not new, it's not 2023, but it has a lot of computers in it. And it's like whether we're driving around the country or just getting A to B, do you need like 20 computers in your car just to make the trip day to day?
Yeah, generally no.
So, speaking of computers, we've talked about like 2014, 2015. We have a 2016 Forester outside here. This one article from the Washington Post we looked at suggested about the infotainment systems, and in this case, I believe it was a Chevy Volt, if I remember correctly. Forgive me if I'm getting that wrong, but the infotainment system was almost Facebook level, like data extracting out of the people's phones. And that's not a joke. It's not an exaggeration. Like they not only checked this Chevy vehicle, but they also bought another infotainment center or head unit off of eBay. Just randomly bought one, and it reminds me of the stories where they were finding all these copied pictures off of old copiers you buy on eBay, and you find like 20,000 scanned images on these actual copier hard drives. The same thing with these infotainment centers. They were extracting like names, phone numbers, addresses, even photos sometimes out of the actual phones that anyone had plugged them into. So you stop and think about that. You own your own car, that's one thing, but you hop on a rental car and you just gleefully plug in your phone to that, and then the next 50 people do that. How much data is being harvested almost in this random rental car? And then where does that data go? I don't know. What do you guys think?
That is, I wasn't quite aware of that. That is kind of scary to think about. I didn't, is there a way to bypass that or?
Not connect your car to
Well, yeah,
the phone.
the obvious, yeah.
Yeah, we did cover that. We have covered that in the past as well, looking at, there was a case a few years ago where a rental car company, somebody rented the car and then looked through all the past logs and they found all the contacts from several previous renters of the car because they just went in there and connected their phone, and they don't think about, what happens when you disconnect. They don't think about the data that was harvested and things like that. So this is why I just take this extra cautious approach. I'm not connecting my phone to anything. I don't keep Bluetooth or wireless on unless it's explicitly being used. And my phone is locked down as well to Lineage OS and other security implementations as well.
And that's a great point, Tom. I think to close this out, we've talked a lot here about data and data connectivity. Some of the newer cars, especially the self-driving one, you think about some of the Teslas, I think have like 19 cameras in them. And then there's other radar equipment. Volvos have lanes assist. They're not the only ones, but I've heard stories of people like fighting the Volvo lane assist to where they're trying to change lanes and they didn't know the lane assist was on, so it's fighting them back, and like the steering wheel is like jerking back in your hands.
You can't do that, Dave.
Yeah. Why are you driving this way, Dave? Yeah, that's a great reference. So when you think about all that, like, where's all this data going? Like, we've talked about all this connectivity, but if you have cameras in your car, if you have all of this information being generated, it's no different than a cell phone. Like the cell phone's generating text messages and emails and everything. Where's all that information going? This article basically says your connected car knows you. It probably knows you better than you know itself, or you know yourself. And with that, the question is like, who's the highest bidder? Let's talk about the scary part. This is not tinfoil hat. This is legit, because who is buying this data and what are they doing with it? I mean, what do you guys think about companies just possibly having access to this information?
I said if you want to know where the data is going, follow me at switchtolinux.com and Switch to Linux on YouTube and several other video platforms, because we cover that on a regular basis, who has access to this data. One of the things we're finding right now is the FBI just came out and said, oh, yes, indeed, we have purchased location data on millions of Americans just to spy on them because they can't collect it directly, but they can buy it third party. And so they have actually done that. So it is going into data brokers. It's going into advertising companies like System One and Google and several other companies that will basically the ad exchangers because they're buying up data, supplementing their profile to better target you with ads. And that's going to hackers who are trying to use this information against you. There was just not too long ago, a recent scheme where people would collect profiles on people, and then they would get the contact information from an elderly person's phone, and then call you from one of your grandkids' spoofed numbers, say they're the grandkid, and extract money from you. So there's a lot of things that can be done with data being collected, which is why we focus so much on my channel about learning how to minimize that data footprint going out.
What do you think, Jay?
Follow his channel.
There you go. Like and subscribe.
Yeah.
Yeah, this article even says many companies view data as the gold of the new wire world. I'm not making this up.
Yeah.
Though for some more it's akin to air or water. I'll repeat that. Though for some it's more akin to air or water. And it even quotes a gentleman in here. If you don't have access to data in the future, eventually you'll be squeezed out. So it goes back to the one I can't remember the name of it, but on Netflix a couple years ago, they're like social media is free because I'm pointing at the camera, you are the product, and so suddenly your car's information, your car's data, and your driving habits, and all the things that are happening with your car, that is the product. And is it going to the highest bidder? Is it going to people with good intentions, or is it going to your insurance company to jack up your rates because you're an aggressive driver? I don't know, but I can tell you that Jay's Mustang doesn't have any of that technology in it. I can tell you my Cherokee has very little, if any, of that technology in it. So the question really is like when you're shopping, I think this ultimately, to close out the video, the responsibility comes down to you. Look at the cars that you're buying. Look at the cars that you're thinking of buying. Ask yourself what's going on with each car. Ask yourself what technology isn't embedded, and don't be afraid to ask those questions of the dealership, because most of them will want you to just, hey, take it for a ride and then sign the papers. But really start looking, like especially with Amazon offering Ring cameras inside the car. If you're not only going to be on video, you're possibly being recorded. There's a lot of cars with built-in microphones from the factory. Really be looking at that, because it's ultimately up to you to make sure you buy the right vehicle that suits your needs and is technologically safe and sound, and keeping you and your family safe and sound. Guys, any closing thoughts?
No.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to watch. Again, Tom, with Switch to Linux, feel free to like and subscribe, and definitely check out more of our awesome videos on Fresh Vintage. If you like muscle cars, if you like classic cars, if you like vintage JDM cars, if you like Mustangs, Camaros, Chevelles, Chargers, and Challengers, and a whole lot more, make sure you tune in and like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.